I think the core things when it comes to the climate finance, I think you're mentioning about the transparency, which blockchain really comes in here in its transparency. And I think we can, just from that really basic, without going into the further details of that, we can leverage on that ability that the blockchain is giving this the transparency, which can be the basic or the characteristics of the climate finance, the fact that here's all the other challenges. So moving further again is for those specific cases, I think, but let me hear something from Phil. I don't know what you could say on that. Phil, you have something?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, thanks, Dennis. And I noticed we've got Edward has also joined.
Yeah, Edward has also joined.
Which is good news. Hi, Edward. I assume you're participating. So yeah, specific areas with blockchain. I'm not sure because I've not done a lot on blockchain. I mean, I think I'm really interested to hear particularly what you guys had to say, because one of the issues that I found in my work looking at climate finance is really the demand for transparency and the challenges around that, and really sort of trying to understand. Yeah, it's really interesting because I think a lot of governments don't want transparency. A lot of recipients sort of don't want that, and so there is that tension. And I definitely agree that blockchain, could force that level of transparency. And so I think it's a good thing. And yeah, back over to you guys, really.
Well, I think we all agree on that, as in terms of the transparency. The core thing is how to use it. I think if you go to this question, which blockchain provide access and lever of climate finance to vulnerable communities, for me, I would say definitely it's yes. We see that without even going to, again, the further details. And why? The fact that you are, as long as the vulnerable communities, that's including, I don't know how we can define them, maybe when you include the gender, all these last mile, involve all their activities as it's defined in whatever specific, like even the small projects. If you look at, I think the CAVIX, I just had a look at that, the set of 4 major activities which are there, which if you forget about the big scales, what about the small scales which need to get there? So those activities, as long as they are part of those activities, and how they measure that, I think that's another case. So the platform that will measure it, if for instance, let's just highlight the IoT, you're including IoT, which I could say it's not something we could get scared of. We know that the costs of IoT have really dropped very down. There are many organizations that are really facilitating the development of those IoTs. They have been embedded into many programs at universities, at many organizations. So it's just this spark of it, and imagine scaling it down to how they can be used. That no, the community getting involved in that, then you could say that could be a way of providing that. And as a blockchain is just a technology, as it says, so developing that, and already the developments which are going on in the technology. And yeah, so that's what I could say on that. I don't know if there's anybody can add on
Dennis,
how.
my question, Dennis, is, what's the value that we're adding here? Because my question is, if you take the CAVEX example, and you've got a platform, it's got accreditation, it's been audited, it's going to be audited. every year.
Mm-hmm.
It's got a big database with all its
Mm-hmm.
data.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, customers can look at the database as a dashboard, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
etc. Is that an example, a scenario where blockchain really adds value? Because my sense is that in that situation, actually transparency and traceability, you know, should be there anyway. You can just use traditional databases, you know, and the customers should be demanding that transparency and traceability. I don't think you need immutable records to have that transparency, because if if people start making stuff up, then you know you'll fail your audit, and you know there won't be the right, you know, spot checks will you know find you, etc., etc. So I guess that's my question. That's my sort of main question about blockchain. It comes out a lot as a potential solution, but I still think there are a lot of instances where actually, you know, just normal databases are sufficient, because the problem isn't that we think Cavex is going to start stealing money. That's not, I think, our primary concern. And so there's a question then of the cost of adding blockchain versus the value it adds. Obviously, having immutable records that everyone can go and look at is great. But actually, if that's not really the problem, then the value that it's adding won't be very much. And it'll still obviously incur a cost to set it up and run it on blockchain. So I guess, you know, as an example, I might challenge that one and say, do we need blockchain in that example? And actually, are there other examples where blockchain have been much more important, where immutable records will change behaviors, and actually, you know, we perhaps couldn't do it if we didn't have, or we struggled to do it without, you know, just rock solid guarantees that we're not going to get any other way.
Yeah, Phil, if I may, Judith, just to follow up on that, I know you've been in the climate finance. If you look at the cost of the transactions, so the cost of transactions, how do we value that? How do we give it some percentage? Because if we can probably understand that, then relate that with the cost of putting up that whole infrastructure of blockchain, which we believe blockchain really lowers the cost in terms of the cross-boundary and, you know, transactions maybe from, and that relates to the flow of the money of the climate finance. So sending money from whatever funds which are there, green finance and all that, to the final users. So that cost of transaction and the infrastructure that it has, that is holding that, you know, I don't know, does it make sense? The kind of question in the cost of the transaction itself that happens without the blockchain, and then putting up the blockchain to reduce the cost of the transaction.
How we'll put it on blockchain?
Judith.
Yeah, I like how this conversation is going, because one of the issues that's coming up, or rather from conversations, is looking at the case, let's say, of Cavex, that you'd be using maybe IoT in terms of maybe the cook stove, and then of course you look at, you know, the emissions, how much, which is real time. That is only just to make sure that, you know, we get data in the real time sense. But then there is a caution in the sense that it will just give you a ledger. From the IoT, you can actually extract it in a ledger form that me as Judith, who has this power cook stove, if I am, you know, a tech guru, I can actually alter. And knowing that this information is what you have to log in, for example, so that you can access the carbon market, then that becomes a risk in itself in terms of accessibility of carbon market. I know when you're looking at Variant Gold standards, they usually send in technical managers to make sure that, you know, in a monthly basis or so, to make sure that this information is actually legit. And this is what, you know, Phil, you're talking about in terms of what kind of data, you know, data that is not corruptible. But then if you link IoT now to the blockchain, that data, there is no chance of corruptibility in that particular course. And that way, then there is, you know, transparent, and that's where the issue of transparency comes in. Because also remember that after this market, or rather blockchain is supposed, or rather it can improve the linkages between existing markets, aka let's say in the context of CAVEX, to national registries. And now that even in terms of carbon markets, we're talking a lot about double counting and such. So for example, if Safaricom decides to do this, then there is a registry. You can see concurrently like who is bringing in what amount of, or sequestering this amount of carbon immediately. And this can be done through the blockchain. So blockchain, I don't want to look at it as an individual project, but maybe this is something that can be built at national level. Because if you now task it to the individual project or even CAVEX, then it becomes very expensive. And this is where the transaction costs come in, because then the pre-financing becomes so heavy. But then if you're looking at blockchain in the sense that, let's say, the Kenyan government actually has a national registry and has employed, blockchain, then all these other small projects or smallholder projects and startups then can report to that effect. And essentially, it is the transparency in terms of what data is going to the national registry, or even the registry in terms of Verra and Gold Standard. But even so, in terms of the payment to the local, to the smallholder, because that is the literal incentive for them to participate. I think those are my 2 points. I don't know if they make sense.
Yeah, thank you.
But I'd like to
hear. Yeah, Phil, you had something you wanted to tap on that before. I know making wrap. We only have 3 minutes.
Oh wow, that 20 minutes is raced by. I guess we've sort of. It's really interesting. It really sort of gets to the heart of what blockchain offers, and actually it offers that immutability. But I guess my question sort of still stands around transparency, and actually, any database can be transparent if it's opened up. So blockchain, it's not neither or in that sense. And I guess it would be, interesting to explore other scenarios other than, we talked a lot about CAVEX, which is one I know very well. But I'm interested in other sort of examples, particularly around anything related to government. Which is where that kind of transparency just disappears, and actually having a mechanism that enforces it, and it becomes non-negotiable, because you can't negotiate with. I mean, I guess you can negotiate, and that's an interesting question. If it was on the blockchain, but actually only the government had access to that blockchain, then again, is there any point? Obviously, it's immutable, and you can't go and sort of change it after the event, which is important. But if nobody can access it, then does that achieve anything?
Just to add on that, I think if I combine those 2 points of yours, considering CAVEX as, I don't know, should we call the gold standard, the platform which is going to take on from that, and the scaling it out, that's another interesting of how you scale it out. And the scaling out, by all means, we see how this climate finance is the money. So if I'm to look at the roadmap, for instance, of the CAVEX, beginning from a national level, maybe looking at all those big projects and then scaling it down, I think that's another of how we're going to evaluate the CAVEX itself as it is. But on the basis of the blockchain, then it gives us, of course, we're measuring the transparency. We're going to look at the cost. We're going to look at what levels, because eventually we want to see the efficiencies of how we're going to monitor, and how, how efficient is the money going to go through. So whatever platforms we know about the data maturity in different regions, so we're going to evaluate. And that they mentioned something about the ecosystem. So we have those many layers that really make it efficient. So if you look at that big picture, I think that's how I look at it. And putting the blockchain aside, because we don't have to conclude that, okay, it's going to make it perfect work, but let's take out the gold standard of CAVEX and begin evaluating. I probably think in the next 5 years, then we'll be able to tell how effective, and you never know, some technologies can come up and maybe take up from that.
answering 4 questions. I'll try and read them out or project them. My co-chair has not joined us, so I'll try and see if I can project, though that will be from an email. I hope it will still be okay. I can try put it in Word. But maybe before we kick off, I'll be moderating this session as your chair for the breakout room. My name is Madeline. I run with Adapter.Earth, which is a program running climate finance for adaptation for smallholder farmers. So we help farmers be resilient, and mostly in their SAL regions. So what we are combining is data tech to just risk score credit to the farmers. And then within the pilots that we are running, we ensure that we also follow up with finance to test that our risk scoring and adaptation mechanisms in what we call the climate adaptation plan for each farmer is really totally translating in lack of default for credit. So we are doing algorithms based on, on data that's combining climate data sets, water, soil, weather, biodiversity. So all those risks combined come out with a risk score that tell us that this is the highest risk for this crop or this livestock system in this particular exact region. Therefore, this is the climate adaptation plan that should be embedded. And therefore, if the farmer is lent to, then the finance will not go into default. So that's me in a brief half a minute. As you answer, I suppose it's nice that you introduce what you do very briefly just before you answer the question so that we can all connect. All right, so we can go. And our first question, which I'm about to put on the screen, is, are fintech and insurtech the next frontiers in the access and delivery of climate finance? If so, why? And why not? If not, are fintech and insurtech the next frontiers in the access and delivery of climate finance? If so, why? And why not? If not, if you can see the screen, just confirm for that first question, and we can shoot. So remember to give a brief introduction of yourself as you contribute to this. We'll do quick fire because
I can't see anything on the screen.
Yeah, I can see Daisy. I'm not actually unable to screen share, so I'll put it on chat. I really hope it's gonna work. Is that okay, everybody?
Yeah, I think having the question on chat will be fine.
Okay, there we go. Maybe Ramzan, as you speak, you can pick that one. Introduce yourself and attempt to share on this.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Mehwish Ramzan, and I'm representing Jazz Telecommunication from Pakistan. I'm working as an environmental manager at Jazz. And as in the first half of the session, it was represented that we are interested in going for net zero commitments. And that is the reason that we are interested in finding out more options, because in Pakistan, this is the first time that any MNO is going to work on such commitment. And being the leader of the telecom in Pakistan, we have to set the example. So regarding the fintech, we are already having this Jazz app, which is known as Jazz Cash. But we want to make more out of it by finding out that how we can disburse finance by using this fintech app. And the reason of joining this session is also to get more insights into that. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ramzan. Anyone else? And thank you. I think this is quite nice hearing what Pakistan is also up to. Welcome. So is there anyone else that would like to contribute to this particular point? Because we are going to do like a roundup summary of all the 4 questions for presentation in the main room.
Yeah, good morning to all of you. I'm Chris. I'm working at the Rabobank in the Acorn proposition. I think it's mentioned in the chat also before in the big session. And I'm looking specifically to the payment methods to reach the farmers, for example, via mobile network operators. And regarding the question about tech, I think tech in general is necessary to reach scale. Also, if you don't have the tech, whether it's feature phone-based, smartphone-based, internet-based, IoT, blockchain, whatever, but if you don't have it, it's all too manual, too error-prone, basically. So, yeah, I think I'm pro.
Thank you very much, Chris. So what I've taken down is that you are attempting to enable payment methods that reach, is it smallholder farmers? Is it correct to say that?
Yes, it's indeed smallholder farmers.
That is great. All right. Shall we move maybe to the second question? If there's a thought on the first, one can always interrupt and add back. So I'm about to type in the next question, which is, what is the competitive advantage of having FIN and InsurTech in climate finance? And we, with you, Chris, possibly just to tell us from your experience, I got it that this is something you're already doing. It's not in ideation stage. You're already using these enablers to reach smallholder farmers. What competitive advantage do you think this is already posing? Thanks.
Yeah, I think it's a bit in the previous answer as well. For me, it's all about scale. I think it was mentioned in the first session as well that if you don't get enough scale, you won't be competitive because the development costs are too high. So there is a reason that smallholder farmers are not so connected at this moment. And if we can solve that through digital means, that means, yeah, we might have a business model there, while otherwise we won't have a business model and we just rely on grants, etc.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Chris. It's true. DG will reach where feet can never reach, or even the brick and mortar methodologies of setting up offices. So that's great. I've taken down scale. Any other thought, maybe, Daisy, Ramzan? We are halfway into our time.
Yeah, Madeline, I would like to add that here in Pakistan, the literacy rate of the farmers is one challenge of using such technology for their insurance of their farms or getting whatever revenue that generate because of the climate financing. So do you have any thoughts that how we can take such challenge while practicing this technology among our farmers?
I could actually throw that right back at Daisy. Do you want to attempt? Maybe Ramzan.
Sorry, Madeleine. As I mentioned at the start, I'm supporting this project from GSMA, so I'm just here in a listening capacity. But thank you. I'm very interested to hear all your perspectives.
Oh, Daisy, I didn't get that. I actually just had, I think Amanda, I had, so I think I was not able to get that. All right.
No worries.
All right. So Ramzan, maybe just, you can just rephrase the question maybe and see if me or Chris can try and attempt it. There was an echo while you were speaking on my end.
Okay. So in very simple words, it will be like how literacy of a farmer can affect the use of this technology, because here in Pakistan, the farmers, they are not that much educated and they have to rely on someone to get the benefit of these fintech and insurtech apps. So how we can ease their life? Is there any existing case study which has facilitated such kind of, how we can do that in future?
I see. You're already on our last question, number 4. Yeah, so we'll get to that. Yeah, so there's a question about, so what are the existing challenges? And that will be our wrap-up question. So hold that thought, and if Chris or myself have any yeah, we'll add to your question. Okay, so I think, but as you are speaking, I've thought of contributing this to point number 2, that definitely another competitive advantage is the cost versus benefit, apart from scale that Chris mentioned, the cost versus benefit of having fin and insurtech in climate finance. Fintech enabling to reach more people at less cost. Insurtech, of course, helping to save loss in that aspect. So I'll post question number 3. Time seems to be really rushing. And the question is, what is the role of MNOs in enabling fin and insurtech, fintech and insurtech? What is the role of MNOs in enabling fintech and insurtech? And I've posted that on the chat.
So from my point of view, it will be providing more connectivity in the far-flung areas. That is the role that MNOs can play in ensuring the access to such technology.
I agree. That's one big overriding one. Chris, you want to add something?
Yeah, just to add to that, I think it's a cornerstone, a building block for us. So without MNOs, there's no way to go further and to get finance to the financial not inclusive right at this moment. But that's surely where we're looking at.
Yeah, I agree. There's no other way around about that. So we can quickly, we have 3 minutes left, and we have that last question, which Ramzan, you asked, which is, what are some of the challenges / recommendations for fintechs and insurtechs in access and delivery of climate finance? There we go. It says, it reads, what are some of the challenges and recommendations for fintechs and insurtech access and delivery of climate finance? So you raised a clear challenge, which is, of course, digital literacy. That's the way I'll put it. I hope I've captured your thought correctly as a challenge. And a possible recommendation, actually, my input is, if we go back to question number 3, apart from MNOs enabling more connectivity in far-flung areas, Chris also said, this being the cornerstone and building block to bring it all together. I think then there's a role as a recommendation. So I'm answering question number 4. For the challenge of digital literacy, there's a recommendation that possibly MNOs can play a larger role that also leads to enabling the masses digitally not literate in sort of very easy ways of grasping technology, even at its most base level. So I'd put it that possibly MNOs can play a larger role to drive digital literacy. Possibly somebody else who can add a point.
Based on your question, I was eager, did you look to IVR? Because we have to say that a lot of farmers might not be literate enough to have like a textual communication. So we're looking to IVR. We're doing a pilot with that right now in Tanzania, I think. And so there's just voice communication. That's the way we're looking at it right now.
Sorry, Chris. I don't know whether it's from my end, but there's a huge background bounce back. Or maybe Ramzan, did you hear Chris properly? Sorry, Chris, but I did.
Yeah, I think there is some bubbling of voice from the Chris side. So the conversation is not that clear. I'm sorry.
I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, sure. But I got the overview that it's a very nice option of using the IVR as a substitute for such technology.
interested in meeting our climate targets, which is 50% emission reductions by the end of this decade. So one interest area would be to how can we tap into the climate finance available out there for meeting our own climate targets, which is, mitigation. So we're really focusing on transitioning to renewable energy for our network operations, and cost, the intensive capex involvement, is very discouraging, when we, think of this shift. So we're looking into different opportunities out there that we could avail for fast tracking this transition. And then secondly, as a mobile network company, how can we play our part in enablement, in climate enablement? For instance, we're currently exploring local projects where our IoT teams or our IoT functions could help support projects that where our services could be leveraged for projects that work towards climate change adaptation or even mitigation. So how can this platform, what can I learn from this platform towards these goals?
Great, thanks a lot, Sadaf. It would be great to hear what maybe Michael, from experience of Airtel, their developments are probably it's something that Sadaf can borrow as an experience of IoT, and maybe just what the applications are you're working on from Airtel Africa, but can be borrowed as well from Pakistan's point of view.
Yeah, thank you, all for the opportunity. I think from my end, we are also looking at options and then the opportunities out of these sessions that exist, both for us to improve as an organization. In terms of, we also have a target of being a net zero ahead of the year 2050, and so there's a lot in terms of investment that is required for actual reduction. And so climate finance opportunities really is also key for us. So that's why we are looking at different options that also exist in the market, and also cheaper options for that matter. So yeah, sadly, we are also still on the learning curve in terms of what is out there, because it's really a new field. But in terms of now benefiting the community, when we look at some of these perspectives from an external point of view, I think we can help the communities and also part of the industry in climate financing. And then I think for us, using mobile money, the use of mobile money is really a big opportunity, because one of the key areas for carbon markets is actually whether the financing actually gets to the actual beneficiaries, so that it doesn't get lost here in between in the process, and that's where we see the opportunity for, because in this part of the world, of course, everyone has a mobile phone. Every adult, if I can say, has a mobile phone, and which can now act as a mobile wallet or a bank account, because not many people have bank accounts, but at least they have a mobile phone. And so if you are talking about disbursement of any benefits that comes out of climate financing, you can really easily trace it to the end user. So in terms of now the opportunities of what a mobile organization can do, we are looking at mobile money as one of them. The other one was what was being discussed, and that's why I had a lot of interest on CAPEX, which is the carbon exchange, because I think there is a huge opportunity to use technology to simplify some of those carbon markets processes. For example, if it's a project on natural resources like trees or forestry, for example, you can use mobile technology to get the locations, to monitor the changes in terms of growth, if it's trees, look at what kind of changes are happening, and then consolidate all that into some information that can be used for carbon verification. So and then have that information, into the carbon market. So that's also an area which I have a lot of interest and really following up to see what the developments are. So I think those two. For IoT, honestly, we haven't really explored a lot because we are still at the basics in terms of what are we rolling out. In Africa, IoT could still be up there, but there is a huge opportunity. So we are also keen, of course, to see how that evolves and how we can sort of borrow from what's happening. But I think for SADAF, I think one area we've seen, especially now when you look at yourselves internally, is once, of course, the journey for net zero is really it's complicated. So what we are currently doing is we've come up with different programs. So first of all, we've done our carbon emissions. We now know which areas and which countries, because we are also different. We're in different countries. Which countries we need to target so that we get the biggest impact. So the stage where we are in now is to look at the different projects that we can do, either for data centers or for office buildings. Look at what are some of the low-cost, low-hanging fruits that we can implement, and then the others for the long term. So hybrid energy solutions, for example. And then we should be able to list that and then do the costings and then tie that to how much carbon savings will come out of it. And I think eventually what will come up is when we even go to the financials, we will be presenting that not just as improvement in infrastructure, but the amount of savings that it will bring. And hopefully we are hoping that that will be able to give us cheaper financing options, probably with lower interest rates because of the climate, the carbon savings angle. I think that's all I can say for now. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. That was helpful.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Michael. So what I'm reading from both of you, Sadaf and Michael, is there is a lot of potential, but the developments are still in the, I would say, early stages. So we cannot really have a more concrete experience of how carbon markets are really operating using IoT. Of course, the pay-go model is pretty mature from the energy perspective, as we've seen in Africa, and the experience on this project. But I'll just push this over to Sam, and Sam probably share from experience. How does the ecosystem look like in terms of the intersection of IoT and then the pay-go model and probably even the different sectors that you've interacted with, and now plugging back to what the comments Sadaf and Michael have just shared?
Thanks very much. So I look at things from a detailed orientated perspective. I work at a research institute, and we've been working on adaptation and mitigation for 20 years.
Sam, your voice is a bit low, or is it
I'm not sure. I'll speak up. Is that better? Is that better? Maybe I'll move my computer around. Is that better?
Yeah, that's a bit improved.
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, maybe something was with the microphone. Right, so I work at a research institute, and we have been focusing on adaptation and mitigation for a few decades. And I think the challenge, from what I can see in this area, is that I see that there's a lot of scoping on users, there's a lot of scoping on instruments and models, and there's a lot of technological applications. But my concern is that that what you're actually talking about most of the time as a field of practitioners is money, rather than adaptation, rather than mitigation. I find the cash flows for mitigation are much clearer. The evaluations around mitigation, though assumption based, are clearer. They're easier to verify. But and as this goes for I would say I would say this goes for almost the entire field of adaptation, private adaptation, so privately funded, is that I'm yet to see an investment case for private investment in adaptation. So I don't understand how it will work for mobile operators making money, unless you're just going to talk about money, and unless you're going to talk about development progress, unless you're going to talk about profit. That's fine, and then it will come. But if you're going to talk about adaptation, you're talking about adjustments to climate stimuli. They need to be verified. You talk about resilience, resistance and recovery from climate shocks and stresses, whilst maintaining pre-existing functionality. That needs to be verified. And so I think my sense is that you're making some progress as a field. I'm not talking about yourselves. I'm talking about the field. There is progress made in relation to mitigation, but the discussion on adaptation is in its infancy. Edward said, I think he said that climate finance is not so well defined. It is actually quite well defined, and it's been defined for 20 years, and it's been explored through cost-benefit analysis, impact evaluations, monitoring evaluation in the public sector for a long time. A lot is known. Very, very little has been verified, but a lot is understood about how it works. So the way I like to look at these conversations is that it's that there's no bridge between the worlds. Often in the private sector, there is very little experience on adaptation. In the public sector, we know all there is to know about adaptation, but we don't know anything about the private sector. We don't know anything about private investment, and that's the truth. In fact, I would go as far as say there is not one single scholar out there, one single researcher out there with a finance background who works on adaptation finance. They're all from the public sector through public funded grants and what have you. And that's where we've gained our experience. So this is a complex problem.
All right, thanks. I know we have very little time. Just maybe each one of us can just give their final thoughts in terms of what we think are challenges or opportunities that can be tapped to get this conversation going forward. So I'll probably begin with Sam.
Well, it would be collaboration. That's key. Otherwise, it will it'll be good for the brochure. You'll be able to put a brochure together in terms of showing how progress is being made, but actual progress won't be made in relation to adaptation and mitigation. If you want to just make money, you'll make money. Sure.
Great. Thanks. Michael?
Yeah. I know it's a bigger conversation, and I think for developing world, adaptation would be it would be more impactful to have adaptation projects rather than mitigation, because that's how it benefits most. But yes, I agree with Sam that it's
Welcome back. I think we are all back. And I will want group one. I guess that is Dennis. Dennis, for now, please give us insights, that are coming from your conversations. And, you have 4 minutes to do that.
Sure. Thank you very much, Edward. You came in the group and Rena, but you were frozen. I think you're scared of the blockchain. So the insights from the blockchain, we're looking at the question. We had actually 3 questions. And that is, the role of the blockchain itself and those specific enabler in the climate finance, and how we would see that its access and deliverability could really get out to the vulnerable communities. And again, what are those challenges and barriers? So what we came up from the chart is the first thing we look at the 2 marrying parties. That's the transferability that the blockchain as a database provides. And that is a claim from the climate finance, this transferability. And we know how transparent the blockchain really enables that. So that is one interesting side. But now, if you go further into that, well, if then that's the transferability and all that, and now we look at the flow of the climate finance. Phil, you may add on that if kind of forgotten. So we look at it in this structure that how we're taking the angle from these vulnerable communities that will be involved. And the very good example we are considering, like the CAVEX, looking at like maybe the gold standard, which is trying to integrate those small projects. These are the final people, and then see how it flows, and eventually it will enable that. And highlighting on some of these technologies, which you mentioned, the IoT, which are still part of that CAVEX. Now, if you look at that, and the thing is, for it to enable that, then these vulnerable communities and all other parties, definitely their activities need to be involved. Now, they need to be involved under the different platforms which will be there. So, for instance, if you're mentioning the platform, the IoT, then yeah, that's something at least we are not much concerned of that, because we've seen how the costs have been getting down, and probably they can adopt that, considering the adoption of the IoT and its technology embedded into the certain schemes, then probably that will be okay. So now we get to that, okay, now, why not other databases? That's a question if we are comparing, and the thing comes in the cost. So it's not just about blockchain, but what about the cost? The cost that you're gonna incur in the flow of the transactions, and the cost that you're gonna incur in putting up the blockchain itself. So that is a debate on that. So it now comes back to, if you look at, again, the gold standard, which you are looking at the CAVEX, and seeing, and now I'm bringing the case that we are taking it on a national scale. So beginning it from a national scale, and then we put it kind of on a way out to see for the different platforms that we have, that we are trying out, for instance, the blockchain and all other, the IoT and in the different schemes, and seeing which one works well. So you cannot be a guarantee that blockchain will work or other databases. But again, you're also weighing out with those other schemes, because eventually we want that transparency, the easy flow of the digital finance to the final users, and the fact that we are monitoring real time, then to have that way. So that was kind of the debate which we had on that, and I hope it makes some sense, and we can be able to take up some questions, or you can have some recommendations. Thank you. Edward, back to you.
Thank you so much, Dennis. Let's move on to the insights from Group 2, and the chair of Group 2, please go ahead.
Hello, thank you so much, Dr. Mungai. So my name is Madeline. I was in the group breakout Group 2, and we were looking at emerging technologies and asking ourselves, so within our group, there's Ramzan, that's an environment manager who disburses finance in Pakistan through an app called Jazz Cash. And I was also with Chris. Chris has developed payment methods that reach smallholder farmers. Myself, I'm involved in enabling climate finance through adaptation mechanisms, and we use fintech, we use data and technology to score risk and then follow it up with finance and test that the finance is indeed getting paid back because the farmer is resilient to climate change. So the first question that the group had to tackle had to do with, do we really think that fintech and insurtech are the next big frontiers in the access and delivery of climate finance? And we resounded a big yes, there's no other way. And we also discussed the competitive advantage of then having fintech and insurtech in climate finance. So we spoke about scale. So there's where brick and mortar can reach, there's where feet on the street can reach. Digital has no limit. And so, we agreed that indeed, fintech and insurtech and climate finance build scale, enable scale. And we also discussed about the cost benefit aspect of less cost for more benefit. And then the other question that we asked ourselves is, therefore, what is the role of MNOs in enabling fin and insurtech? And so apart from, enabling more connectivity in far-flung areas. We agree that indeed MNOs are the building blocks and the cornerstone of fintech and insurtech. I think it's a role that can be assumed to be a side aspect, but it's really a cornerstone and a building block when you really think about it. And so the last issue that we tackled is therefore what are some of the challenges that fintechs and insurtechs face in the access and delivery of climate finance. And we spoke about digital literacy being one of them, and then said, you know, possibly one of the ways to then give MNOs a bigger role to play in enabling fin and insurtech is actually, can they also drive, you know, the literacy that's required at a very basic level as a larger, more rounded role and responsibility. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Madeleine. Let's, Anna, did you actually have discussions on the, did you have discussions within, I can see your group was 2 people, and Anna, who was the chair of that group?
Tim was our key lead. We also had Sanjoy join us for a period before he moved to another one. So I will hand over to Tim, who had lots of very interesting points to share on this.
I'm sorry, I just had a little network problem. I'm back. Yeah, we primarily discussed MRV for private and public sector and what also the different requirements are and the different options for digital MRV. So one issue that, well, I personally encountered in the public sector especially is that governments usually need PDFs to process, like printable PDFs, at least quarterly if, or annually, that they can put on paper and file off somewhere. So no matter how data intensive and how powerful our digital MRV gets, if we can't get a printable PDF at the end, it's probably not compatible with government procedures. And while most governments are working on digitalization, I don't know, maybe the Chinese are there or maybe the Koreans, but at least all European governments I'm aware of still need that PDF. In the private sector, that's different. And at least for Gold Standard, I'm also aware that they are investing heavily into an end-to-end digital process for the carbon markets. Another thing we touched on is the possibility to verify digital data, which also can be really critical. So, and there one option is basically the secure hardware environment approach, where the hardware you're using is basically the user doesn't have root access to the hardware. So it's kind of like the iPhone approach, where the ultimate control over the device lies with Apple and not with the user. But most phones out there are Androids where users have root access, so you can't inherently trust all the data that comes off these phones because they are in principle manipulable. And it's also extremely difficult to verify that they haven't been manipulated later on. So we can try to either go with data formats that are particularly difficult to falsify. Video is the primary example where it's possible to falsify, but it's impossible to falsify in a non-detectable way. And it's also very expensive to falsify. And we can work with triangulation. So we can, for example, compare satellite images to the reporting from the ground that's been using mobile phone technology. So, and then see if that's a roughly matching. In that discourse, we also always have to remind ourselves that the old and existing systems for MRV are really bad, and they are also manipulable. So just when it starts with the project developer takes a random sample, already there you can start manipulating by taking a non-random sample. And it's impossible to verify that if that has taken place or not. Anna, did I miss anything important?
We also talked about the role for smallholder farmers, or some of the benefits for smallholder farmers.
Oh yeah, that's actually a big one that's particularly important to me personally, that very often the carbon market transactions happen over a gigantic power gap. So it's a smallholder farmer selling to a oil corporation, a transnational oil corporation usually. So, and often in the current environment, it's a take it or leave it offer. So this smallholder farmer either participates on the terms that are already defined, or they don't participate at all. In a digitalized environment, smallholder farmers could have access to pitching their same offer to several buyers, and therefore, ideally, a more digitalized and end-to-end digital, especially, marketplace could allow to change the negotiation power there. And it's something I've already observed under Article 6 negotiations, that the sellers actually have a better negotiating position than they had in the past. Because at the moment, the market is short and all the buyers are struggling to get quality credits. So we are seeing that shift already. And I think it will only get more. And if we can use digital platforms for farmers to directly compare the offer they're getting from, I don't know, Nestle and BP, then at least they can play different buyers against each other, which currently they can't because they always have to go through intermediaries. So that is also a very interesting perspective that might realize in the future. I haven't seen that yet, but it might be in the way forward when we actually get an end-to-end digital process. So that's it from my side.
Thank you so much, Tim. And then we can move to group 4, which is IoT and pay-as-you-go.
Yeah, hi, hey Edward, great to see you again. Hope you can hear me and see me. And so we were the team working on the pay-as-you-go model and IoT potential for carbon financing. And I'm happy to note that we had 2 participants from the mobile network operators who happen to be sitting, right into the IoT itself. Internet of Things requires their own, but the ecosystem to be well supported from an internet perspective. So we also had another participant who's a researcher, and one of the things that really came out conspicuously in our room was there is the potential of carbon financing, and there is the potential to scale pay as you go in conjunction with IoT, but it has not matured to the level that the mobile network operators are anticipating. So in essence, coming from the discussions that we've seen on the African continent, we have a lot of pay-go services running in the energy sector. Quite a number of startups, quite a number of companies have already set up services, but then the mobile network operators still feel there's just a huge opportunity that has not been exploited yet. But even as we look at that, in terms of the financing itself, one of the participants really brought a very good point, that it would be great to observe if the real beneficiaries of the finance gets the money at the end of the day, because there's pretty much a disconnect in terms of the sources of the funds to the end groups of people who are meant to use these finances. So there's also the challenge of, much as there's a blueprint that looks at the net zero towards the 2050, there's also a challenge of just the understanding of the climate financing itself, as you had alluded earlier on. But one researcher counted back and said climate financing has really existed for, the whole concept is mature at this point, and the concept is well understood by, I would say, groups from other places, but not as much in other places as well. So in this case, it means if that checkbox needs to come out clearly to really understand and help now the mobile network operators, and know how to play into the whole ecosystem of the financing. Now, but there's also the component that is clear, is as we talk about the climate financing, there's also the sustainability of the business that need to come out of this. And mobile network operators, I think, much as they would like to participate in the conversations for mitigation and adaptation, they also need to point out clearly if they're in for the money or they really want to support the initiatives as well. And that became very conspicuous from a point of the current developments or activities that are pushing for climate financing through PayGo and IoT are largely led by the public initiatives. So there's very little from private sector trying to push that as well. And that, I think, mobile network operators, so that it's quite a gap as well. And just looking at part of my final notes, the recommendations that came out of the room was we need to push for more collaboration. So collaboration is not existing to the level of the technology providers, the mobile network operators seeing their play in the ecosystem, and then the users of the whole pay-as-you-go combined with IoT technology. And then we need to also have a proper definition of the sectors within which the technologies can play to be able to leapfrog the adaptation initiatives. So there's quite a number of things to talk in there, but I'm thinking that the sessions was a bit short, and we definitely look forward to hearing more recommendations and sharing more after the call, even after the call. Thanks.
Thanks, Leonard, for that. Let's go to the last one, which is gender and climate finance, and quickly spend 3 minutes to share with us the findings out of that.
Great, thanks, Edward. I'm happy to report back. I'm Chantal Barrett from Co-Sustain Consulting. So we had a small group. It was myself, Elsie from Plan International, Leila from GSMA, and then Sanjoy joined us as well a little bit. I think, we didn't really get through all 5 questions. We spent a fair bit of time on the first one, which is what is the intersectionality of gender and climate finance? And then we sort of briefly touched on the second part, which is, what is the role of mobile money in climate finance? And I think, when we look at the intersectionality, there's one of the key questions is what climate finance is actually going to girls and women? And I think to start with that question is quite sensible. And it links back to the point that several people made, and the point you made, Edward, at the beginning in terms of what is climate finance, whether it's the government-to-government flows or whether it's the private financing, which is the area that I'm particularly involved in. And so if we look at the different flows of climate finance, within those flows, what's happening and how much is actually going to women and girls. So that was we spent a bit of time talking about that. And I'll come on to that bit in the context of the 2X collaborative as well. The second point that came out was, again, something similar that's been said, is that there's a connect between what's going on at the global level and the local level, whether that's in terms of understanding the different sources of climate finance at the global level, and then how they're filtering down at the national level, and then from that at the very local level. And I think there continues to be that disconnect there. We talked a fair bit about data and the sort of eternal lack of data in this space, particularly when we look at climate finance and gender disaggregated data, that continues to be very patchy. So it's very difficult to answer the first question that we set out. But it's really critical, and it's an area of focus, because until we get the gender disaggregated data and really understand what amount of climate financing is going to women and girls, it's very difficult to do something about it. We then sort of touched on the role of mobile money in climate finance. And I think one of the points that Sanjoy was raising was a good one and a key one, which is that entrepreneurs that are gender smart, so that's either women-led entrepreneurs or those that are working with a gender lens, are cut up from mainstream financing. And this is something that we see from our work in the 2X Collaborative. So I'm an advisor to the 2X Collaborative, which is an industry initiative set up by the DFIs and the MDBs, but it's now a much broader initiative. And one of the key sort of objectives of the initiative is to work with private financiers to drive more money in a gender smart way. We do that using the 2X criteria. So it's not just about women-led businesses, but it's about businesses and entrepreneurs that either have a product or service that disproportionately impact women or have gender smart boards, etc. And one of the things that we're trying to do is to look at the nexus of climate finance and gender. So the group had launched a toolkit last year at COP, which is looking at the why, what, and how of climate finance within the world of private finance across different sectors. So agriculture is clearly a key one. And that's our attempt at defining the nexus and saying, how can we channel the flows of financing that is going from DFIs, MDBs, and other impact investors in a way that is climate smart, but also gender smart.
My name is Leila. I've met the both of you. So I'm no stranger. I obviously work for GSMA as the Insights and Advocacy Manager for the Climate Tech team. Over to Elsie.
Hi, I'm glad to see you again, Leila.
Hi.
My name is Elsie Masava. I work with Plan International. I'm a youth advocacy advisor, and I'm here by virtue of having a new focus on climate finance, the intersection of the engagement of young women, basically with climate finance particularly. So looking forward to learning more and also seeing how we can synergize things. Over to you, Chantal.
Great. So we're definitely going to have a good conversation. Yeah, so I'm Chantal Barot. I'm the founder of Co-Sustain Consulting. We're a small boutique consulting company based in the UK. I've been working in sustainability and climate change for about 20 years, but more recently working with investors on gender finance and now increasingly climate and gender finance. So I'm a strategic advisor to something called the 2X Collaborative. I don't know, Elsie, whether you're aware of that. So I work with Jessica Espinosa, who's the CEO, and the board quite closely. And I work with a number of the working groups, including our investment officers working group, it's a working group for the transaction officers. It's for the investment managers who are doing the deals themselves. So it's run by the deal makers for the deal makers. And we do a whole bunch of work with them, from training and capacity building to co-investment, opportunity sharing, etc., all with the lens of gender. And then I work with the members individually. I work with them through the 2X Collaborative, also work with fund managers, many who are based in Africa, who want to lend with a gender lens. And so there's a whole program of work that we do with fund managers and other investors, banks in across Africa. So I think the questions that we've got here are actually quite useful, particularly when we're coming at it from, I think, different backgrounds, because this first one around, what is the intersectionality of gender and climate finance? I feel like it's kind of simple one, but we could probably spend a whole hour on it. So, but it'd be useful, Elsie, maybe just to get your take on it. I know sounds like you're coming to this maybe a little bit new in terms of climate finance, but maybe you can talk me through the intersectionality as you see it, and maybe any questions that you have.
Yeah, as you said, yes, we are pretty new in this conversation, and also it's a new scope or new phase. I think she's called Angsha of GSMA also mentioned that we are in that landscaping. Oh, great, Angsha. We are in that landscaping space as Plan International. But what we've seen over the years is that even as we respond, particularly within our different regions across the globe, is that we are increasingly seeing the need to already adapt our approaches and also our activities or engagements within these different communities due to the fact that climate change is actually impacting the most. But what we've seen is most critical is that as much as we want to talk about climate change and look at the adaptation and mitigation practices, it all boils down to what financing is going towards young women, particularly, or girls and young women. And this is because women are the most, impacted, but this is because they are the ones at the root, at the community level. They're the ones doing all the work in terms of resources, in terms of agriculture, in terms of water management. So all these things, as much as they may not have all these fancy names, this is what exactly they are doing that we really want to impact. So our question then lies in how do we connect the global conversation with what is happening, with what we see daily happening at grassroots level. The Horn of Africa situation is really a big challenge for us right now. The intersection of not only drought but also conflict when we come into Central Sahel is also something that we are now looking at it from a very gender perspective. And one of the things that we see when it comes to conversations around climate finance is that, number one, the accessibility of these processes is quite limited. Reason being that most of these people who are—
Sorry, I missed that last point, Elsie. What did you just say? What is limited?
Accessibility to critical financial processes that are ongoing within the climate change space is actually one of the biggest challenges that we see women actually facing. Number two is also the aspect of when the interventions are being made or resourced, particularly in terms of adaptation and mitigation, is that the data is not sufficiently disaggregated in that sense. It may look like we usually feel like this is a rhetoric, but we believe that it starts with that. So when we look at the intersection of not only digital technologies and now climate finance and the possibilities that big data can bring on board, but also the challenges that we must be aware of, the risks that come on board, we see an opportunity in the sense that this data will allow us to be very clear on the parameters that we need to employ in terms of financing adaptation and mitigation measures. So big data is actually a big thing, but also we very cautious in terms of what it may entail in terms of the misuse of data. So those are the biggest things that I'm feeling right now are critical and something that we're also big on. And that's just basically the connection between the global and the local space. But we also have more meso level kind of engagements when we look at regional and national level engagements, where then we're still at the point of voice. That's the challenge. The challenge is, as much as we want to speak about how we can resource or the allocations in terms of gendered finance, in our view, is that we're still at that level where the participation of these critical voices is still lacking. And therefore, even in climate finance spaces, we are challenged in that. Yeah, I think that's the key things. And I'm sure as we continue to converse, a lot will come through. Yeah.
Okay, there's a lot there. Maybe before I share my 2 pence worth, what would you find helpful? Like, what do you need in your work?
So number one, the opportunities to already engage in this very high level, not only high level, but also at national level, opportunities of entry in these climate finance discussions. When we're designing, yes, climate action, particularly say even at national level, voices of women are lacking. Number two, if we have data, it will actually back our engagement very heavily, because we will notice and see clearly the ones that are actually most impacted are these women, who are the ones who are the front line, so to speak, in terms of the engagement. So data is very critical for us going forward, and also that accessibility. Number three is also the understanding of these processes, the breakdown of how these climate finance processes are. They are not very, can I say, easily understood to the the most affected, particularly at local level. So that's already a hindrance in terms of ensuring that we are resourcing, in the direct way. So those are the things that I'd really bring out at this point. Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm picking up, and going back to this thing around what is the intersectionality of gender and climate finance, I think your question here around what climate finance is going to girls and women is a really good one. It's a really essential one, I think, to start with. And then everything that you were saying around we need data across the board. We certainly need data in terms of the disaggregation of climate finance, but we also need data in terms of the impact that it's having on women and girls, the amount they're actually contributing. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, because there's a whole world of work going on. And then the third point around actually understanding what these processes are around climate finance, both at the global and national level. Like, what are the processes? How is climate finance how are we defining it? How is it flowing from the different pots of money? Because there's quite a complicated landscape, which I think Edward said at the very beginning, in terms of understanding what we each mean by climate finance. I come at it from a private equity point of view because it's the investors that I work with. But I think our colleague from FCDO was pointing out, you know, the definition of government to government climate finance, which is the 100 billion. So I think there's a key question around, when you talk about climate finance, which climate finance are you talking about? And then what is that process in terms of climate finance, whether it's private finance or public finance? That's a really key one to distinguish between, and I would guess that that's where the first hurdle is really, to understand that landscape of climate finance, then to understand within that what portion of that is going to women and girls. And then we can overlay all of the other questions that we have around that. The work that I do, as I said, with the 2X Collaborative, we focus mainly on gender mainstreaming throughout all of the processes of the DFIs and the MDBs. So they deploy, obviously, various instruments, whether it's debt and equity. Let's just say there's obviously blended finance, guarantees, risk sharing facilities. But let's say at a very simple level, they're providing a line of credit or a loan to an equity bank in Kenya or Uganda. What we're seeing them do is to say, we would like you to portion a certain amount of that line to women and girls, to two women or women entrepreneurs or whatever it may be. And there's a whole body of work that's going to actually help them define what that portion should be according to the 2X criteria, but also what it actually means. So if you receive $10 million, let's say, for example, to give out in loans on the ground, how can you channel more of those loans to women entrepreneurs? And by the way, how can you channel it in a way where you're actually giving it to women who are on the front lines of climate change and actively building the solutions, like you were saying? They're the ones, you know, engaged in water management. They're the ones doing agriculture, and so on. So how can you actually, you know, target that money towards the women on the ground who are, one, suffering the most, but two, are active solution providers across the piece? And then how can you add extra benefits to those that are actually contributing to adaptation and mitigation? So I think for me, that is the sort of intersectionality. And then maybe the other key question to this is, what's the role that mobile money can play in climate finance? And we've had some conversations around this, but you know, and we've got some examples as well, but it's not really something that we focus on hugely within the 2X Collaborative. But my sense is that it's definitely a big piece. It's a key part of the puzzle. And I think, you know, from the investor point of view, we're coming at it from the capital that we're deploying. We know how we want to deploy it, you know, using the sort of 2X criteria, you know, to the investee companies. And then my sense is that from then on that chain, investee companies and how they're deploying their capital and how they're using mobile money to actually, let's say, keep track of the loans, to get more women entrepreneurs onto their books. That's the role of mobile money. And then I think there was a lot of talk around using mobile money to gather, you know, credit worthiness, information, data, all of that stuff, the transparency piece, you know, what are they actually doing in terms of adaptation or mitigation?
Maybe just to add to that conversation,
go ahead.
One point on that, in terms of the role of mobile money in climate finance, and you know, looking at one thing we will note is that as much as there's, you know, quite a number of women entrepreneurs already engaging in this scope, they possibly lack full knowledge or the capacity that would allow them to really adopt mechanisms that are, you know, efficient, you know, so to speak. So one of the other things, even as we collect data, is mine would be can I call it the recycling of data utilization beyond just one level, where we engage not only credit modeling or payment details, but we are looking at how we can plow it back into the ecosystem and ensure that that data we are scraping off or we are gathering actually transforms not only the businesses or the enterprises that are in play, but also allows for the credit modeling that was the initial objective. So to me, I feel like we can engage in, I don't know the best term, but I call it recycling of data to ensure we can get the most out of it. Leila, over to you.
I just saw that Sanjoy has joined, so I was thinking maybe you could quickly introduce yourself and see if you have anything that you would like to add to this conversation as well.
Well, I was actually in the MRV group, and then I bumped back into this gender group. So sorry about that. I mean, my area of work actually is to help private sector financial institutions and also private impact investors to move money into climate. And just one of the things that has bothered me especially in the African work that I have done, is that the entrepreneurs who are creating gender-specific impact strategies seem to be, the ones that are completely sort of cut off from mainstream impact investing. And I've always sort of been interested in exploring how blended how structures can be put in place to support those entrepreneurs in particular. The example that I'll give is companies selling solar pumps to women, specifically. I mean, I've written a lot about this, so, and I'm happy to share, an article which I wrote.
Selling solar what, sorry?
I've written about entrepreneurs who are using solar, who are using a women's only channel to sell solar systems. Entrepreneurs who are using, that of course is not adaptation, it's mitigation, but entrepreneurs who are using, actually a woman entrepreneur in Kenya using, targeting women farmers in the arid areas. That's this type of stuff that I feel, we just haven't been able to support these entrepreneurs, and I'm kind of interested in figuring out, is there a way to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. We don't have much time left. We've got about 30 seconds left, but I'll just round off by saying the work that we do with the 2X members. I think we've got about 50 members on board now. Many of them are DFIs from across the world and MDBs. And we're looking at this very exact thing. How can we channel the DFI financing, particularly climate financing, to go towards women entrepreneurs?